This video is a summary of the Education Endowment Foundation's report into improving the use of written feedback. The report goes on to provide some guidance on how we can improve both of these problems. The main findings are: the feedback we provide should be determined by the type of error made by the student. Secondly, that the grades provided would obfuscate any formative feedback given to students. Thirdly, feedback works best when it is specific and actionable, with time to respond and the resources and potential further teaching so that students are able to then act upon it. And finally, that teachers should focus their marking efforts on less pieces of work. Instead of marking everything in a student book, the report guides us to focus on the quality of our feedback as opposed to the quantity and frequency. This is more likely to lead to greater progress made by our students, provided that the aim of our feedback is to improve the pupil's thinking and is not necessarily about improving the student work that has been completed. The report suggests that we ensure our feedback allows the students to revisit the main idea being taught. So, how might we go about narrowing down what we go about marking? Firstly, we need to decide when more teaching is better than written feedback. Written feedback can only be effective when students have sufficient understanding of the topic being studied. So, before we set about marking a whole set of books, we should sample a class across its ability range, looking for any common errors and weighing up how much the students know. With this in mind, we can then make the difficult decision about where we can have the biggest impact. Would it be providing feedback at that point? Or would more teaching and more practice be more beneficial for our students? We can always go back and reassess the concept at a later time that the students are working on. We know that simple content in straightforward tasks, the best form of feedback we can give is verbal as the students are learning it. As tasks and content become more complicated, a delay in providing feedback has been shown to be beneficial. The way we can narrow down what we mark is to set assessment tasks that only focus on a single learning intention. Now, this is not always possible, so even narrowing down the field will give students a better chance of receiving helpful feedback on the key ideas of your subject. The alternative is when we set a more open-ended task. When we come to provide feedback, we again narrow down the field and only provide feedback on one or two specific criteria. So if I've set an extended piece of writing in science, I might just want to mark it for the use of scientific vocabulary. The next bit of guidance states that the use of targets to make marking as specific and as actionable as possible is likely to increase pupil progress. This echoes the guidance from Dylan William, who suggests that feedback should be a recipe for future action, so that it is broken down into small steps, that it is focused on one area or concept at any one time, that the classroom has sufficient support so that students can action the feedback given, and that the feedback provided must be about the content being learned. For some students, we know that the written feedback will be sufficient. However, others may require more explanation to ensure that they get on. So we can do this by deciding which ideas we need to re-explain. We can provide extra resources that will support the students as they learn, and we can also identify the students which would benefit from a more one-to-one approach as the students set about responding to the feedback provided. causes the error. We know that errors in student work caused by a misunderstanding of the material are best addressed by providing hints or prompt questions which will lead the pupils to the underlying principle being studied. If, however, it was a careless mistake in the work, then the best way of tackling this is to simply highlight it as a mistake. Providing prompt questions rather than teacher correction promotes greater student ownership over the correction process. This, if done regularly, can have beneficial effects on students becoming better at self-assessing and error checking their own work. The final piece of guidance is a great way of saving teacher time by using codes rather than lengthy written comments. These are just as effective provided that time and support is provided to allow the students to properly engage. So for example, if I've been doing some chemical equations and the students are missing either a reactant or a product, I can just use the letters R and P. Now, to support the students, I would need to think about either using group work or possibly doing a quick teacher summary before the students set about doing that work, or leaving some examples on the whiteboard so that the students can check their work as they work. Here's an example from English. If you've got T2, make a link to the question at the end of every paragraph. So the students get their work back. They could be supported by simply providing some sentence starters or some connectives to help them make those links. Or the teacher might decide to look at some successful and unsuccessful student examples so that the students have a very clear idea what success will look like in that particular task. The example in T1 seems to me a lot more complicated. Analyse the words Steinbach uses in more detail, looking for alternative interpretations. So again, some students might be able to do this just by providing some good and bad examples, but some students might need to have some of those words highlighted to which the teacher wants them to focus. This might actually require the teacher to do a little bit more teaching, so they might need to model how they would go about providing an alternative interpretation by speaking out loud, thinking out loud, and showing them exactly how they would go about tackling that task. So, in summary, whether you provide feedback or more teaching depends upon how much your students know. 2, it's really important to focus on the quality of your feedback over the quantity and its frequency. 3, teachers should target the content that will have the biggest impact on their students. 4, feedback should make the students think about the content, not necessarily the task. Prompt questions help increase student ownership of the feedback and their learning. 6, feedback needs to be actionable by students. You need to say exactly what you want them to do. 7, marking codes will save time and are just as effective. And 8, giving feedback is only a small part of the dialogue between students and you about their learning. We must also plan to support them for the time we give them to respond to our feedbacks. Thank you.